Everyone will please stand for the pledges. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, and indivisible. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Lost the Texas flag. I was going to say, yeah, I couldn't find it. Okay, so we will open for citizens' comments right now, but if you are here to speak on the variance changes, we will let you speak under the public hearing. Okay? So we will move on to the approval of minutes. We have two sets to approve. We have July 10th and July 22nd. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
Any corrections, additions, or changes?
No.
Okay, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
I need a second. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Minutes approved. All right, we have two public hearings tonight, but we are going to do them as one. So I will read them both. The board will receive comments regarding the request of Steve Buis requesting variances to Zoning Ordinance Chapter 14, Section 4-2C, area requirements, to reduce the lot size from 2.5 acres in a single-family 2.5-acre residential zoning district to 2 acres, and to reduce the minimum lot width from 300 to 169 in order to sell the property with an existing home. The second public hearing, the board will consider the application of Steve Buis requesting a variance to Zoning Ordinance Chapter 14, Section 4.2C, area requirements, to reduce the lot width to 169 in a single-family 5-acre residential zoning district requiring 300 minimum lot width for a future single-family home permit. So I will open the floor for comments in the public hearing. Mr. Buis, this is your opportunity. Yeah, make sure it's red.
Yes, my name is Steve Buis, and basically what happened was I bought a property on 1139, and it was 10.7 acres. When I bought the property, it had 2 property IDs. So, but before I bought it, I thought I was calling the city, but I actually called the county because I thought the property was in the county. And I asked them if I would be able to buy the properties and sell those individually, because it does have 2 property IDs, it's fenced in the center, and I always just assumed it was 2 properties to begin with. And it's my fault because I don't know who I spoke with, because when I called up there, I didn't know who to speak with. So I just left them the information that I needed, and they had someone call me back, and this was about May of last year. And I explained the situation, and basically they told me that it has to be a minimum of 1.5 acres. And so the original property ID was 1 acre and then 9.7 acres. So they told me it had to be a minimum of 1.5 acres, so I had a platting company redo it, or surveying company redo it I just did it 2 acres just to be safe. So, this whole time I thought everything was correct. So I had the surveying company do it 2 acres and then 8.7 acres. And they told me, I'd asked them, how to get the address and everything for the property next door. So I went through the process and applied for the other address next door. They gave me the address for that. So then I had 2 addresses. So I ended up putting the properties for sale, and I had the for sale signs, one on each side for several months, and no one ever said anything. Then we found out it was in the city. Well, then we pulled the permits on the remodel we were doing on the house. And so we had a couple inspections, and everything was fine. But on the last inspection, we were told that it didn't have the property width requirement, which I'd never heard of 300 feet property width anyway. And of course, I'd already sold the land and closed on the land by the time I found this out. So now I have the land that's closed, and then I had a contract on the house which the gentleman, he's 75 and had to have a place to go, so they told me that I could lease it until I had the meeting. So that's basically where we're at, and that's how, I got to this point. And that's the issue, is that I already had the land closed on. It went to the title company, went to finance, and went through county. I mean, now it's registered at the county as the other owner owns the property now. And again, I thought I was doing everything the correct way until it was too late. So that's why I'm here. Because I know that the people that bought the land, it's 170 feet wide. I know eventually they're going to want to build a home on that. And then, of course, the gentleman, that bought the house, he's single, so, the house is already there, and it's 2 acres with 170 feet wide because it's split right in the middle. Each of them had their own culvert, the driveway and everything already. So that's kind of where I'm at this point. That's why I'm requesting that variance, so the people that bought the land will be able to build a house on that eventually. And then, of course, so the gentleman that's in the house now can close on the house. So.
Okay, so we have to ask if there's anyone in the audience that wants to speak for or against these variances.
Okay.
And there is no one in the audience. So we will close the public hearing at 7:17, and we will go back into normal session. So we are going to discuss and act regarding the request of Steve Buis requesting variances to Zoning Ordinance Chapter 14, Section 4.2C, area requirements to reduce the lot size from 2.5 acres in a single-family 2.5-acre residential zoning district to 2 acres, and to reduce the minimum lot width from 300 to 169 in order to sell the property with an existing home. We will discuss that piece first. So, board, questions for Mr. Actually, let me let Mr. Coker give his report next.
Madam Chair, I think Mr. Buis did a pretty good job of explaining the issues. I just want to refer you to page 22 of 40 in your handout from me. It's a picture that looks like this one. If you take a look at the north side of 1139, you can see that none of the lots on the north side, on the northeast side of FM 1139, have the 300-foot required width. In fact, the lot that Mr. Buis bought to start with had 330 feet of frontage. It was the only one along there from the neighborhood that is on the southeast side of his property that had the required 300 feet of frontage. So that entirety, in fact, the part that is immediately south of the subject property is former council member Patrick Sharp, and he was short. That was close. Start with an S. Short is on the south side, and his property, the properties on the south side tend to have the 300 feet of frontage, but on the north side not. With that, I think that if you think about the standards that are required for you to grant these variances, they're labeled out pretty well in the powers of the board under section G, and I think that you find in the variances section in that first paragraph, this is one of those examples of where you really have the flexibility to provide a variance that does not adversely affect the community. And I think in this case, because what they're asking for is consistent with what's already along the northern side of 1139, it makes perfectly good sense to grant an approval here. I'm glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Mr. Coker, I have a question on the side setbacks of this 2-acre piece of property.
Yes.
Since the frontage does not match with the new dividing to the 2 acres, are the side setbacks in place?
Yes. With the 169 feet of frontage, that gives you the width all the way back on both of these tracks for the frontage and for that 500 feet or so that the smaller tract has. But you have plenty of room for the required setbacks on both of these tracts of land.
So the current house that is on the 2-acre piece, the way it's now subdivided, meets the side setbacks?
It looks like that to me, and I've got a survey that I looked at, and it looks like it meets those requirements.
What do we do in the case of the land that has been sold when they decide to build? What are their options?
the Alexanders own the piece of property that, the bigger piece. And I've talked to Mr. and Mrs. Alexander, and their intention is to get a house that's, they don't have to plat that property because it's larger than 5 acres. He's going to have to plat the 2 acres. When that happens, then his tract will be platted and it'll meet all the requirements aside from the 2.5 acre lot size. Then when the Alexanders come in, they'll have to meet the requirements of the setbacks. And they'll be okay.
But they do not have 300 foot of frontage either.
That's correct, because the second application that's on this agenda is for their property to have a reduction from the required 300 feet to 169 feet as well. And should you approve these 2 variances to the front yards, they run with the land. And it's not an ownership deal, it runs with the land. So the Alexanders would be covered. They don't have to plat in order to create a building site, as long as they've met the other requirements of our zoning ordinance, and they would in this case. Question?
I'm getting a light here. My question on the 2.5 acre stipulation, is there any precedent for that, for just accepting that as is, or do we need to have better justification why that can be, why the variance could apply for that, when in other cases that we've heard, the setbacks and whatnot, if you can get around it, you can fix it. It would seem, although the property has been sold, it looks like this could be resurveyed and redimensioned into 2.5 acres and avoid the problem altogether. Is that off the table because it's already been sold?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, the property was sold by meets and bounds, and I've got a copy, in fact, I've attached a copy of the survey instrument, and it's pretty specific. And so and I asked the Alexanders if they'd be willing to sell back a 1/2 acre to Mr. Buis in order to solve that problem, and the answer was they bought that property with the intention of having it for them to build their own home, and they wanted to maximize the amount of that, especially the back where it starts to be 330 feet again, all the way back to the back of that property. So, Mr. Nickel, the answer is I don't think that that's a solvable solution here, because the availability of additional land is not there.
So the fact that it was sold without realization that it was a violation plays no part?
I think in this case, because it was, if there is any such thing as an innocent mistake, I think this is as close to that as you're going to get, because I believe that Mr. Buis attempted to figure out what was going on, and he got some bad advice, not from the city necessarily, but from other people, realtors, closing agents, financing groups, because clearly this property is in the city, and it should have been divided using the platting process to start with. And had that occurred, we would have then been able to make sure that he didn't sell off more than he could use to make the requirements of our zoning requirements, which is that 2.5 acres. But that train has left the station, and we don't have a choice. Now, you do have the option. If you don't think that he meets the requirements of this section G, and that it won't have an adverse effect, you can deny this. You can deny it, but I think that does not serve the public. I don't think it serves the city, and I clearly don't think it serves Mr. Buis or the Alexanders appropriately.
I have a question. Since the property has been already sold and split into 2 lots, essentially, why are the Alexanders not here to represent themselves? How's he representing them?
Well, I talked to the Alexanders, and they gave him, I've got a notarized statement authorizing him to act on their behalf. And so that's why they're not here.
And they're elderly?
No, they're not.
the Alexanders.
No, they're not. The gentleman in the house is.
Now, let me ask you this. How old is elderly?
Well, he's 70.
Not relevant to this discussion.
I didn't think so either.
Mr. Bias, I have a question.
Yes.
Where do you currently reside?
In McLendon-Chisholm and Kenwood.
And why would you think that this property on 1139 was in the extraterritorial jurisdiction?
Well, again, I didn't check the facts, but when I first moved to that neighborhood, one of the neighbors had told me that that our neighborhood was in the county a few years just before that. And I guess when they did the neighborhood that backs up to my house, he told me they just went straight through and just took the neighborhood into the city, which, well, that's what I was told. And again, for me, it didn't really matter at that time if it was in the city or the county, you know. I mean, I wasn't going to buy it for either way. So to me, it was just kind of general information that I just heard. But again, that's my fault for not following up on that. So I thought anything past our neighborhood was in the county. So.
Any other questions for Mr. Coker or Mr. Bias on the first variance? Okay, I have an order question for Lisa or Shelley. Do we need to vote on this one before we discuss the second one, and then we can vote on them separately? I'll defer to Mr. Coker.
I think that you need to discuss the first one, act on the first one,
Okay.
and then discuss the second one, and then act on the second one.
Okay, so if there are no more questions on the first variance, I will remind the board that it is to reduce the lot size from 2.5 acres to 2, and to reduce the minimum lot width from 3 to 169. What is the board's pleasure? Would entertain a motion.
I move to accept the request as written and approve the reduction in lot size and reduction in lot width.
We have a motion from Gary Nickel. Do I have a second? We have a second from Herb Harker. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Aye. Okay, we will...
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
could I ask a question before you go to the next one?
Absolutely.
Mr. Nichols' motion to approve, let me ask a question about the requirements of the code. The board shall have the power to authorize upon appeal in specific cases such variances from the terms of this ordinance as will not be contrary to the public interest where, owing to special conditions, the literal enforcement of the provisions of this ordinance will result in unnecessary hardship, and so that the spirit of the ordinance shall be observed and substantial justice done. Was that the foundation for your motion?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now discuss and act on the second variance request. It is the application of Steve Buis requesting a variance to Zoning Ordinance Chapter 14, Section 4-2C, area requirements to reduce the lot width to 169 feet in a single-family 5-acre residential zoning district, requiring 300 minimum lot width for the future single-family home building permit. Questions? Discussion?
Mr. Coker, is there any restriction on where on the larger lot a residence could be built? If they want to put a monster house that doesn't fit in the 169, can they push it to the back where it's wider?
Yes, as long as they meet. I think Ms. Stibbins asked the question about setbacks, and they would have to comply with all of the required setbacks, irrespective of where they decided to put the home, whether they put it on the front 500 feet or the back 1,000 feet. They're going to have to comply with the provisions of the setbacks and the height and the square footages. So, I mean, there are some constraints that they'd have to live with, but they're dealing with an 8-acre, 7.5-acre tract of land. It's a lot of dirt.
Any other comments or discussion? I will entertain a motion. to do that. Mr. Coker, do you have anything to report on this variance request? Or did you do it all in the first one?
I did it all on the first one, but I've recommended approval in both cases, the first one and this one as well, because I really think it conforms to the requirements of that section I just read to Mr. Nickel about Section G, because it really does add value and it does no harm.
All right, I will entertain a motion.
Everybody shy tonight.
If we don't have a motion, it is going to die for lack of a motion.
Just thought I'd share the time. I move to approve the request as written to reduce the lot width from 300 feet, the lot width requirement from 300 feet to 169 feet as written.
Second. About Bogart. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Aye. Passes 4-1. All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Wait, Mr. Chair,
I'm sorry.
I have one more question for the maker of the motion. You remember what I read to you the last time?
Yes, sir.
Same standard apply?
Same answer.
Thank you.
Okay. Motion to adjourn. Second? And we stand adjourned. Meeting adjourns at 7:32.